Hi, parents. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We have such an amazing event coming up for you guys. I know that you are going to enjoy this because we've been looking forward to this. We have an amazing expert with us on the call. So thank you for joining in. Before I go into talking about and introducing our guest, I wanted to acknowledge that this event, and I never introduced my name, people always pointed out, my name is Petra Deeter from Victim to Hero Institute. So this event is being syndicated through our partners, and I wanted to acknowledge our partners, which is Parental Alienation UK, and also the Associação Portuguesa para a Igualdade Parental e Direitos dos Filhos. I apologize. I know that I butchered that, but anyway, that's the National Portugal's Association of Parent Rights, Equal Parenting and Children Right. I apologize. So anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I saw people in the chat room already. Claudia, hi, thank you. Kenneth, Selma, thank you. Mary, thank you so much. And it looks like everyone's calling in from everywhere. Feel free to post your questions. So we have today with us Dr. Steve Miller, who is an amazing thought leader in this field. And I'm so excited to have him here because really he's one of the rare few experts in the field that you can really ask him about anything, particularly challenging topics, about enmeshments and, counter to topics and things like that. So Dr. Miller, thank you so much for being here. So I wanted to start this conversation with the fact that parental alienation is so counterintuitive, and this parents see all the time. We look at what happened when professionals don't get it, when we're looking at how the communities around us don't get it. When someone look at a child that reject a parent, immediately they pointing the finger at the parent, the rejected parent, instead of stopping to think that the child may be manipulated. So could you, and I know that you have a list, the dirty 30, and there's a shorter list of the dirty 13 point that is counterintuitive about parental alienation. Would you please address those?
I would be happy to, but first let me say thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and welcome to all of you people out there in cyberspace who unfortunately I can't see, but hopefully you're seeing and hearing me well enough. So we did no preparation for this other than like 2 minutes ago, Petra said, I want to start asking about counterintuitive things. So this will be very unrehearsed, and I think we'll be able to pull it off though, because I do get asked the same questions a lot. So after a while, my own repetition kicks in, and I can probably give you a halfway good answer. Let's start with what it means to be counterintuitive. Now, I have a couple of things I do whenever I am interviewed and whenever I present. I figure anyone can read the book, what do they need me for? Or, so that's really true. So I try to say, what can I say that wouldn't be obvious? You might even hear me say there are two things about that. One is obvious, one is not. I'm going to try to point out some of the less obvious things. Let's start with what it means for something to be counterintuitive. Most people know what that means, or at least they can figure it out. It runs counter to your natural intuition or your natural instincts, or even runs counter to common sense. That's what it means. But that's the obvious thing. At least two less obvious things. One of them is that if you're explaining this to someone else, like a lawyer explaining it to a judge in court, you might want to point out that when people say it's counterintuitive, we're not just warning other people to be careful. We're saying, don't use intuition. The warning is to not rely on your intuition. Now, the reason that's so important is if you're making intuitive judgments, then they feel natural. Intuitive judgments feel right. They feel correct. That's almost the definition of intuitive thinking. If it didn't feel good, it wouldn't be intuitive, to beat the point to death a little bit, right? So I will often tell attorneys, after you use that word, say something like what I just said. I'm not just warning the court to be careful. With all due respect, Your Honor, I'm begging you not to rely on intuition. Here's another less obvious point. Even if it's professional intuition, medical intuition, clinical intuition, legal intuition, judicial intuition, with one exception. And the exception would be that you're a genuine specialist in the field, not an expert, quote unquote, but a specialist. Now, incredibly enough, I've not only spoken with a number of psychologists, not meaning to criticize anyone, but psychologists and mental health professionals, and I've actually got transcripts where they were testifying in court. And when asked if they see a difference between an expert and a specialist, they say no. And as far as they're concerned, they're the same. Well, to show you why that's not true, if you were having a heart attack, your primary care physician is not a cardiologist. So if you think anyone with an MD can and should take care of the heart attack or another major problem for your loved one, and you don't get the concept that some people out there do nothing but this or have deep understanding right from the start, that's a problem. And as I have to make a joke here, it's almost counterintuitive to think that mental health professionals don't know that they're not specialists. Right there, that's a problem. Now, they may be a specialist in mental health, mind you, but they're not necessarily a specialist in parental alienation or realistic estrangement or other things that go with that. I'll give you one other example. Your family doctor might well be either board certified in family practice or board certified in internal medicine. Now, especially both of them are experts in the heart. An internist, I think, could credibly say, I specialize in internal medicine. But the internist should not say, I specialize in the heart, or that I'm a cardiologist, right? So there are different levels of expertise. The next thing I want to do is give an example. My favorite example is the treatment of ADHD, right? And attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, a DSM diagnosis, ADHD for anyone in another country. That's Apple, David, Harry, David. How do we treat that? Well, I bet most of the people in the audience are already nodding their heads. You treat it with a stimulant. You treat it with a drug like Ritalin. Now go back about 50 years and picture what it was like in the early days of using a stimulant, which is the one we use, the group, mostly amphetamines. Giving a powerful amphetamine stimulant to a hyperactive child. If you brought that child to a doctor 50 years ago and the doctor told you we're going to put him on a stimulant, you would think that doctor is crazy, right? That's counterintuitive. And being careful wouldn't be helpful. You would have to know the literature on using amphetamines to treat ADHD. You couldn't say, well, I'm a very good doctor and I'm not going to do it because the kid's already, that's my best example. There are a lot of others, and I'm going to maybe throw out one or two more as my introduction. In general, children, if there's an abusive and a non-abusive parent, in general, with rare exceptions, the children tend to align with the abusive parent, not the normal or non-abusive parent. Now, if that isn't counterintuitive, I don't know what it is. So again, there's an obvious and a less obvious piece of this. I think what I said is surprising, but maybe not difficult to understand. Some people might not understand it well or know where it came from, and some people might have skepticism or even healthy skepticism. But the fact is that's settled science. We know that's true. So why? And how do you convince someone? It's back to the ADHD example. If this were 1970 and you were begging for a prescription for your child to get the Ritalin, just asking for it is not likely to get the average psychiatrist to write the script. So how do you deal with the other example I just gave you? Well, For one thing, we have studies. We have studies from the foster care literature, and we have other studies, including one that I did that I'm not really going to get into, but it's a study I did with Dr. Baker and Dr. Burnett, Dr. Amy Baker and Dr. William Burnett. But to simplify it, children tend to cling to abusive parents. Or to put it another way, to expand a bit, this is the less obvious part, it's counter-instinctual for a child to reject a parent. Now, I'm using a different word than intuitive. Counter-instinctual is somewhat like intuitive, but it's a little different. Instincts are different than intuition. And children are basically instinctual creatures. They will almost never do anything counter-instinctual or counter-instinctive unless some force is pressuring them to do it. Peer pressure, parent, whatever. So when you see a child doing something counter-instinctual, your first question should be why? What's going on here? And now you may not believe that it's counter-instinctual for a child to reject a parent, but just for the moment, take my word for it. Here's where some of that knowledge comes from. First of all, at a macroscopic level, meaning big picture, when you look at the foster care system, whether you interview people, whether you look at the literature, even if you look at children who are being severely abused physically, they generally don't reject the parents. They might resist contact. They might be afraid. I'm not trying to, I want to oversimplify. But in general, they tend to cling to the abusive parent and they tend to defend that parent. And anyone who works in the system, almost anyone, I'm going to stick my neck out, anyone credible with a lot of experience would tell you, take the abused child, give them a 1-hour supervised visit, and they're happy to see the parent. And at the end of the hour, they probably want more time, with rare exceptions. Now, I am not saying that if the parent's violent, injuring the child, neglectful, doesn't feed the child, that the child doesn't mind or doesn't care. What I am saying is there isn't the type of rejection that one would see from a severely alienated parent. All right. So that's one example. Another point to make before I even give you the second bit of scientific background is that if you have an exception where the child is resisting, refusing, or does seem more traumatized, let's take a hypothetical where maybe dad is beating the kid or mom is not feeding the kid. They might resist, but they don't look like alienated children. They look as different to a specialist as a dog from a cat. Now, do they look different to non-specialists? Probably not. The generalist, the inexperienced person, is likely to pay attention to, well, the kid seems to know what she wants. The boy obviously doesn't want to see his father, whatever it might be. But if you know what to look for, and there are a lot of things in clinical practice like that, including especially in medicine, but also in any mental health or psych discipline. If you know exactly what to look for, then you have certain discriminators. So to summarize that second piece of the first point, even if you have an exception to the rule where the child does resist and doesn't want to be there, if you actually look to see if the child has the signs and symptoms of an alienated child, those would be rare. All right. Now, the second big piece of information gets into evolutionary biology. And I can't give people a dissertation on evolutionary biology or science, but there are two things you should know. One is that the field is far more sophisticated now than it used to be. Leaders in the field, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to single people out, but famous evolutionary biologists would tell you that the detail and the accuracy and the validity of the science is very, very good. We can now look at DNA from Neanderthals and compare it to humans, and we can see which sequence of base pairings, we have in ancient DNA. So evolutionary science is now very accurate. Does it know everything? No, but some of the things we know very well. And so applying that here, if children rejected parents for trivial reasons, their genes would have been gone millions of years ago. Evolution has wired the human species in certain ways. That part is so obvious that it's really not debatable. Again, unless you reject science and you don't know the difference between science and a belief system, and that's fine too. I don't mind. But if you're actually talking science, let me illustrate. So Mother Nature has wired us to favor false positives. If you hear a rustling in the bushes and you think it's a tiger and it's just the wind, you live. If you think it's the wind and it's a tiger, you're gone. Your lunch, your prey, right? Think back 1 to 3 million years, even to, not modern humans, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, even those folks probably already had that bias towards false positives. Because if they didn't, you can model this mathematically, say they probably wouldn't be here. But even if I'm wrong, that's certainly true for modern humans and recent humans and so forth. So I'm only trying to give you an example of something that we know from evolutionary biology, not teach a course in evolutionary biology, nor, to be honest, do I consider myself an evolutionary biologist. I have enough of a working knowledge to know this makes sense. I'll give you another example from science. This is actually both science and modern history. People have heard of the Stockholm syndrome. Here is a basic summary. So I like to remember the numbers 2, 4, and 6. In 1973 in Stockholm, where I had the pleasure of not only visiting, but giving some talks 3 years ago, 2 bank robbers kept 4 adults hostage for 6 days. And at the end of the 6 days, the 4 adults did 3 things. They were rescued. They criticized the rescuers. They resisted the rescue, and they refused to testify against their captors. Now, that's only 6 days with adults, and they were strangers. If 2 strangers, armed men, are able to convince 4 adults in only 6 days that they're the good guys, they're the victims, they're the ones to align with, imagine what it must be like if it's unfettered access to children from one of their parents or another alienator, right? And the way that's usually written up is it has to do with the identification with your captors. It's sort of a defense mechanism. If you identify strongly enough, you're out from the middle, you're in less danger. Again, I could get more technical, but that's the gist of it. And so that's another example from science and both experience of why when someone tells you a child is acting in this extreme way to reject mom or dad, why that flies in the face of both science and other areas such as experience and even probability. Let me think, do I want to add anything to that? Well, that was an introduction to what counterintuitive means. None of these things make sense. Who would have thought that the people in Stockholm would resist rescue and refuse to testify, right? If you're going by intuition, any normal smart person would think that's nuts. But we happen to know that's what happens. Dr. Amy Baker has a very nice book out called Bonded to the Abuser, which also reflects that sort of a theme. So that's how it is. People identify with the abusive parent. and it has all kinds of secondary benefits to them. It just is irrelevant in trying to determine whether you're dealing with parental alienation on one hand or realistic estrangement on the other. And if you think you can do that intuitively, you're not only wrong, but you're probably dangerous, with apologies to those people who think they can do that. Okay, so that's sort of a general background. Let me go through some actual counterintuitive points, although I don't necessarily want to make this into a presentation. Do you want to jump in with any questions, Petra?
No, I do have some questions, but yeah, let's just go into the 13 or so points that you have, and then I'll add some questions. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you 13 points, and I don't remember whether this is actually one of them. I just printed something that has my dirty 13 on them. I changed the order and I changed which make the top 13 from time to time. But I am going to start by throwing out something that's more of a general point. It's not quite as general as the first one, but we know how to diagnose this now, right? The idea that we're all just guessing, or there are no good methodologies, or the criteria are unreliable, or they haven't been validated in the proper research randomized clinical trials. That's just not true. And if you know what a straw man argument is, it's a straw man argument. A straw man argument is an argument that either the other side isn't making or that no one is making, and you attribute that argument to your opponent, and then you attack that because it's a weaker argument. That's the definition of a straw man argument. So one of the many straw man arguments in these cases is that no one can agree on a definition. They don't really have criteria. It's all subjective. The worst of all is that if you believe in alienation science, then when you see a rejected child, a child rejecting a parent, you just assume that means there must have been an alienator. Nobody does that. I don't know anybody who does that. Certainly no published author has published such a crazy statement. So they actually pollute the literature and they pollute the well of justice by spreading that lie. I'm only focusing on the old, if you believe in this, then you assume it's alienation. Okay, that one big lie. If you convince people that that's what alienation specialists believe, well, that's an easy thing to refute. Of course, you shouldn't do that. The problem is no one does. So again, straw man argument, right? So I'm still sort of trying to provide a little more foundation. So we do have good criteria. And if you're using something called the 5-factor model, which is really almost the same as the 4-factor model with an extra prerequisite, then what you're doing is you have a nice methodology, and each of the factors is well validated. I'm going to quickly say what they are, then I'm going to do my 13. So first of all, although lawyers and judges and others certainly can use the 5-factor model, it should really only be done with substantial input from a well-qualified, advanced clinician. Because like every other factor or criterion in medicine or clinical practice, you need clinical judgment to know whether it's there. Let's take an example, heart attack. So if we say that people with heart attack have chest pain, well, what kind of chest pain? Sharp or dull? Continuous or off and on? Where does it have to be? Smack in the middle, more diffuse? Does it go to the arms? Does it go to the back? You have to kind of know what you're doing. You don't just say, okay, chest pain, or no. Here's a pitfall, and I don't mean to be tangential, but many, many, many people who are having heart attacks and who do have chest pain, if you say to them, do you have any chest pain? Their answer is no. Counterintuitive. Every medical student needs to learn this. So what's going on? The senior doctor with a lot of experience says, hi, Mr. Jones. The nurse tells me you've been having some chest pain today. Oh, no, doctor, I don't know why she told you that. Well, it says here, chief complaint, chest pain. I never said that. Oh, okay. Well, let me ask you this. Is there anything that's not quite right in your chest? Oh, yes, but it's not a pain. Well, how would you describe it? It's more like a tightness or a pressure, doctor, but it's not a pain. Okay, that's a pain. Maybe it's not a pain to him, but it's a pain to me. And so I couldn't overstate the danger of handing a bunch of clinical criteria to a bunch of novices, even if they're clinicians, let alone, letting lawyers and judges and social workers and whoever else try to apply these criteria. That said, here are the 5 factors. Number 1, you need a child who's resisting a normal relationship, not resisting contact or refusing contact. Now, if they're doing the latter, resist, refuse, contact, that just suggests that the severity is greater, but that's not the minimum requirement to meet that criterion. Well, why not? Lots of reasons. It's not normal for a child to resist a relationship. I'm going to do my old, here's the obvious and the less obvious again. The less obvious is if that were the criterion, you're basically handing victory to every clever alienator and every clever attorney who gets involved. All they have to do is get the kid to show up. There's no contact resistance. She's never been late once. She goes to her visit every single week and she stays the whole time. Yeah, she locks herself in the room. She denigrates the parent. She doesn't eat. But hey, according to them, there's no alienation. So that is really not, the resistance is really not, in my mind, it's not an indicator. It doesn't tell you why the child's doing that. It might be that there's been domestic violence or abuse, neglect, whatever. It's more of a prerequisite. Why are you even using the rest of the criteria if there's not something going on? And the something would be what I just said: resisting decent, normal, whatever, healthy relationship. All right. Factor 2. And I don't want to make this into a 5-factor talk. It's a very important topic. You just mentioned the conference coming up in mid-May, Family
Yes.
Access.
Yeah.
We're gonna
I'm I'm gonna share that right now. I have it here. Um,
Oh, I can
so
tell you, it's May 14th to 16th, Friday night.
yeah, yeah. I want to show parents. So I saw that Elaine is in the chat room. Thank you, Elaine. So for parents, Elaine is the founder of Family Access Fighting for Children's Right, and she has a conference that coming up. And Dr. Miller and also attorney Ashish Joshi are the co-directors of the conference coming up. So you guys can go into the Family Access Fighting for Children's Right to get tickets to this virtual conference that's coming up on May 14th. It's called Helping Courts Understand the Phenomenon of Alienation.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. So my main point there is that we're going to address that. It turns out that I know that will be mostly on, well, not mostly, but mostly, but not only on Saturday, because I'm involved in at least 2 of the presentations that will address it. So I don't want to take up a lot of time with that now, other than to mention, let me get to factor 2. So all right, let me actually go back. So factor 1 is that they're resisting something, but it's really relationship, not contact necessarily. If it is contact, then that means it's more than minimal severe. All right, but it still might be very severe depending on how they are when they get there. Severity is another one of those things that takes an experienced clinician. It's a lot like whether there's chest pain or not, right? Every 2 feet, there's a landmine when you do this, and novices are very dangerous. And I'm talking novice clinicians, not non-clinicians. Okay, so the next factor is whether there's a normal baseline relationship. And the landmine there is who defines normal. And the PA critics scream about how, they can't define normal and it's all subjective. Well, that's not true either. It's no more true than whether that chest pain might be a heart attack, right? I don't just go by this description. It's either a yes, no, maybe. If it's a yes, then I have other things to do. If it's a maybe, I have other things to do. There's a stepwise process, and that takes clinical judgment, clinical experience, and clinical training. And it's probably takes a specialist level expertise. Although I wouldn't want to say that a good family doctor or a good internist doesn't have that. Okay. So those are the first two factors, and I consider them prerequisites. Uh, Good baseline does tell you somewhat, but there's yet another landmine. What if it happened from infancy and there was no time for a good baseline? Do you say, well, we don't have that, so the kid's not alienated? Well, it's been going on since the child was 9 months old. Of course, we don't have that. Again, clinical judgment, clinical experience, dangerous in the wrong hands. Now, the next three factors are the nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes, pick your cliche. So what's often called factor 3 would be to look at the disfavored parent, and there are a lot of ways of saying that: disfavored, rejected, targeted. But I'm deliberately not saying alienated. Another common criticism that shows a lack of understanding is to fail to understand that there are some terms that are neutral and other terms that imply what's going on. So favored and disfavored parent, or favored and preferred, favored, preferred on one hand, or disfavored and rejected on the other, doesn't tell you why at all. That's why it's such a big lie to make the straw man argument that when we see alignment or rejection, we just assume that it must be alienation. You really can't tell a bigger lie than that. If you don't know it's a lie, you're not competent. And if you do know it's a lie, then you're dishonest. I mean, that's the most polite way I could put it. So back to looking at the disfavored parent, we want to start without any biases, or at least as few as possible. You can't start calling that the alienated parent, because now you've got a circular reasoning. All you know at first is there's an aligned child who prefers this one to that one, parent to parent, right? So you should be using terms like favored and disfavored. Now, as you gather more evidence, you may change the way you describe it to targeted versus alienated parent, but even those are not quite the same. Targeted could mean they're shooting at you, but they're not hitting. The child might, the other parent might be targeting you, but the child isn't buying it. So that would be a targeted parent, but not an alienated one. So, precision of expression is important here. And most of the PA critics show almost no understanding of these things at all, hence many, many straw man arguments. Let me try to make a few people laugh. I normally don't love yellow Post-it notes, but I always keep some on my desk. They're kind of bland to me. I like a nice bold red, or, I even more prefer the ones that say note on them. See that? All right. I use the yellow ones because straw is yellow. And every time I'm reading someone's report and I see a straw man argument, it gets a yellow note. And when I'm done with the average report that misses the boat, I've usually got about 10 or 20 yellow Post-it notes. And I just write straw man in the margin. That's a little bit of an aside. Anyway, so what we're looking for in the disfavored parent is the the absence of bona fide abuse, clinically significant neglect, or markedly deficient parenting skills. I'm going to repeat that because I'm choosing those words carefully. I actually am pretty sure that although they're being used a lot now, I think they come from something I wrote in 2012, copyright 2013. It's a book edited by Dr. Amy Baker and Dr. Richard Sauber. Most of you have heard of it. It's called Working with Alienated Children and Families, a clinical guidebook, like $50 for the paper copy on Amazon, Working with Alienated Children and Families. At the end of that chapter, there's an end note, number 4, and I'm explaining certain things. I don't want to get into what I'm doing in that chapter, but it's a chapter on reasoning and decision-making in these cases. and it's a long chapter. It's like 16,000 words, right? Well, basically the terms, clinically significant, markedly deficient, and all that, I explained it there, and I borrowed that from general medical terminology, and it's a very useful set of terms. So I'll say it one more time. If you're looking for factor 3 and you're looking to see if the disfavored or rejected or targeted parent, if you're trying to determine is it alienation or not, to meet the criterion in favor of alienation, there should be an absence of bona fide abuse. Notice the word bona fide, clinically significant neglect, and, markedly deficient parenting. Now, I want to go back and explain each of those a little bit. What is bona fide abuse? Well, there's going to be fuzzy. I understand that one person's abuse might be another person's eccentricity, but that's why you want someone with seasoned clinical judgment, experience, proper training. Um, um, I think most mental health professionals know abuse when they see it. Bona fide, for those of you who might not speak English as a first language, is another way of saying genuine. And there's going to be black, white, and gray. Is screaming at your kid once, that just screaming, I told you to do it. I told you not to do that. Is that abuse? I'm not even going to try to answer that question. It might be if there's a pattern. It might be if you're looking menacing at the time, or it might not be if you're doing it differently. There's a name for that in cognitive science. It's sometimes called a midpoint phenomenon, and I'm being unclear, so let me explain. When there's black and white and gray, if you're smack in the middle of gray, that's sometimes called a midpoint phenomenon. And it's very well known in medicine, whether you use that term or not. If your blood pressure is 90/60, is that good or bad? Well, I don't know. If you're in a cold sweat and you're tired and pale, it's bad. If you feel great and you want to go out and play ball, it's not bad. And that's, my mother's blood pressure was 90/60 her whole life. It's healthy, right? So you can't just make these arbitrary cutoff points. And if you find yourself smack in the middle, is it abuse or not? Give me 10 bona fide experts and I'll show you at least 5 or 2 or 3 different opinions. The good news is you rarely find midpoint phenomenons. Most cases are more clear. They declare themselves. That's obviously abuse. That's obvious not. If you do find yourself in the middle, let's go back to that 90/60. Call the cardiologist. Find someone who knows how to sort that out. We do know how to do that. By the way, I'm going to slip in a credential here. So at one point, about between roughly 20 and 25 years ago, I wrote the chapter on hypotension and shock in the best-selling medical textbook in the English language. So I knew a little bit about having to sort out midpoint phenomenons and when 90/60 is good and when it's bad. And the way we summarized it is to ask, is it more good than bad, or is it more bad than good? Acknowledging that it's sometimes difficult to make decisions under uncertainty. And the field is called decision-making under uncertainty. And among other things, a psychologist by the name of Danny Kahneman received a Nobel Prize in 2002 for his work on reasoning and decision-making. His partner, Amos Tversky, unfortunately had passed on by then, or he would have surely got a Nobel Prize as well. I'm trying to make you laugh. When I made similar comments once in a case, some lawyer mocked me for saying things that amounted to Nobel Prize winning work. It wasn't my work, mind you, but if you're belittling Nobel Prize winning work in court, you probably don't know what you're talking about. Okay, so again, if you want to Google something, Google decision making under uncertainty. I just gave you a medical example that can easily be applied to an alienation or psych example. Under no circumstances is it okay for any clinician to not be familiar with these concepts. Now, they might manage to fake it till they make it. They might manage to fool a lot of people, including a court, but it's really not okay to not understand how to weight and combine evidence or to sort out the midpoint phenomenon or any of such thing, right? Again, if you don't have a specialist, find one. Before I move on, I've also heard criticisms that, well, these people who specialize in alienation, they're just saying that for business reasons. Because, if you need a specialist, there aren't very many, and then you'll have to hire them. Think how crazy it would be if I referred you to a cardiologist and you thought the reason I did that was this cardiologist isn't any better than anyone else, this way they make money. I'm sure some people might actually do that horrible thing, but to assume that because we're recommending a specialist, it really doesn't need a specialist. It's just that I'm trying to feather someone else's pocket, or perhaps me and my colleagues, right, want to feather our own. Here's my quip for that. Show me a lawyer or a judge who would do that when their own child or grandchild needs heart surgery and they think it's okay to have a general surgeon, and then I'll believe them that is not a straw man argument, or at least that they don't understand how the world works. So factor 3, I'm unpacking it for you. So the bona fide abuse, we usually know it when we see it, but you can also look at standard definitions. The DSM definition is quite good on page 719. I happen to memorize that, so I'll see if I can get it right from memory. Child psychological abuse, this is psychological. Child psychological abuse is non-accidental, non-accidental verbal or symbolic acts by a parent or caregiver that result or have reasonable potential to result in significant psychological harm to the child. Now, I think I just got that right, but if I got one word wrong, I apologize. But the key point is, all you need is reasonable potential to harm the child. You don't have to be a genius to figure out that destroying the child's relationship or even damaging it with the other parent meets that definition. And another thing you can do is you can look at standard examples from various textbooks. One of them is to undermine the child's relationship with the other parent. Another one is to place the child in a loyalty conflict. So, like many things in clinical practice, having only one criterion, oh, look what you did. Yep, 995.51. That's on page, keep it up there. Okay, so these 3 things. Look at the bottom. Parent-child relational problem is on page 715. Child affected by parental relationship distress is on the next page, 716. And child psychological abuse is on page 719. Keep it up there, Petra, for a minute. I am commonly attacked, as all my colleagues are, we are all commonly attacked, by the straw man argument that it's not in the DSM. If you guys want to be academic, really get good at straw man arguments. So when they say, Dr. Miller, it's not in the DSM, isn't that true? The scientifically correct answer is no, that is not true. Now, if you're in court, it's not my job to point out that it's there with different terms. So in terms of testifying, I would simply say, I don't agree with that. It's not true. And let the other attorney who's cross-examining me, or maybe the friendly one who wants to bring it out, say, well, gee, I don't see it in the index. And the answer would be, well, the people who wrote that section have chosen to use these terms rather than alienation or estrangement. They believe this would be better. And in some ways it is, actually. I would rather have done it. I would rather have seen it there. But the reasoning was, pay attention, because I think this is pretty important. Forgive me for that. But the reasoning was that these 3 terms can be used individually or in combination. And they are more precise, perhaps more powerful. They let you fine-tune your diagnosis. And so that is why it is written up this way from the DSM-5. Another thing that's very important to know is who wrote the section. And the section was written by 2 child and adolescent psychiatrists. not psychologists, but MD psychiatrists. To be more specific, Marianne Wambolt, Marianne Wamboldt, and William Narrow, Narrow being the usual spelling, Narrow. They wrote a paper with a third child psychiatrist, a name probably better known to you, which is Dr. Bill Burnett, William Burnett. And the paper is called Child Affected by Parental Relationship Distress, commonly abbreviated CAPRD. So the authors are Burnett, Wambolt, and Narrow. Now, they could not have been more clear that it was not omitted from the section for any scientific reason. It was omitted for the reason I just told you, plus they're trying to limit terminology bloat and maybe avoid a term that is often misunderstood. And they thought it had the advantage of being able to fine tune, and I'll repeat that part. But there's a whole section on parental alienation in that paper. And it is as clear as could be how to define it, that it's real, that what I just said. All right. So I think this is a good example of a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Many of the people who are even assisting the alienated parents, the truly alienated parents, go to court and concede, well, okay, it's not in the DSM. Oh, that's not even true there. That's another straw man argument. And when someone says, who says so? One answer is the American Psychiatric Association, and the other answer would be the authors of that section. So I could go on. I think everyone gets the idea. My grandmother had a great expression. She would say, I don't have to eat the whole fish to know that it stinks. She'd be like 125 now, God bless her. Okay, so you could take down that very useful slide, pretty graphics too. And I'll just go back to where it was. Now, what I've been doing is laying foundation for counterintuitive. I would respectfully submit, regardless of who you are or what you think about this or me, I would respectfully submit that that was, kind of foundation. And I don't think there's much that's debatable there. I'm trying to identify gray areas. And my main point is not to deny them, but to say you can't get around them. Every area of medicine has that. I could literally talk for 2 hours on gray zones in medicine. I can't resist. I have actually spoken for hundreds of times on clinical reasoning and decision-making to doctors. And when I'm pointing out that there isn't a sharp cutoff between things, the best laugh was usually this. Then and now, from my early days to now, if someone has tuberculosis and you're giving them a certain drug, isoniazid to be exact, supposedly they have to be under 35.
Oh, I think we
That
frozen.
worked.
Okay, sorry. I think we got frozen. I think the last thing I heard was under 35.
Okay, there's a drug for tuberculosis. And supposedly, according to the book, you're only allowed to give it if they're under 35. And the drug happens to be called isoniazid, abbreviated INH. And recently I looked it up to see if that's still true. It's still there, under 35, because it can cause liver problems and all that, right? So I would then say to picture a group of 100 doctors, and I'm trying to teach them proper reasoning. And I'm trying to teach them decision-making under uncertainty and how to deal with the gray zone and how to deal with a midpoint phenomenon. And I would say, how many of you follow that rule? And almost every hand in the room would go up, even at Harvard. And I'm not sure that's true now. I've been doing this since the 80s, right? But back then everyone would say, yeah, it says it right here in the book. I'd say, okay, how many of you have ever done this? The patient comes in 1 week after his 35th birthday. And do any of you say, oh, Mr. Jones, I am so sorry you didn't come in 8 days ago when you turned 35 last week? Now I can't give you isoniazid anymore. That would be crazy. No one does that. You ask risk benefits. Does this guy already have liver disease? No. Does he never drink? Is his liver great? Does he have a bad risk of TB? Yes, right? So nobody should be making arbitrary yes, no decisions based on, simple, um, simple heuristic rules. You need a thinking clinician, preferably a senior one. Well, alienation's just like that. Very, very much like that. All right. So with that extended foundation, and I have a reason for spending that much time on foundational issues, I really think they're more important than the specific issues. For that reason, I have devoted what amounts to almost a full hour to that. And now I'm going to give you some specifics.
Can I just quickly show the 5-factor model for parents, because you kind of cover some of it. So this is from the book by the Parental Alienation Study Group, PASG. It's called Parental Alienation Science and Law. It was edited by Dr. Burnett and also Dr. Lorandos. Both of them we have interviewed on this show multiple times before. And again, we're going to be interviewing Dr. Burnett again in May. So anyway, these are some of the, like, Dr. Miller just mentioned some of the factors here on the model, but you can actually get the book and get more information on that as well.
Okay. So, it just occurred to me, I actually didn't really get into factors 4 and 5 yet. Shame on me. So I'm going to do both of those now. But thank you for showing that, because I think it's a great book. It's only been out like about a year, but it's a great book. All right. So let me move on to factor 4 and 5, and then I'm going to give you a few more counterintuitive points. Well, let me go back to make sure I didn't skip anything. So there's the bona fide abuse, clinically significant neglect. Forgetting to give the kid lunch on one day doesn't make you a clinically significant neglectful parent. That's back to the black and white and gray. You got to know how to draw those lines. There usually is no line. The way we would say this in science is the line between this and that, between illness and disease, between this and whatever it is not crisp. There's usually a fuzzy transition zone. And if you really want to read about it, the field is called fuzzy logic, which doesn't mean fuzzy thinking. It just means fuzzy black, white, and gray. How do you grade the gray? How do you deal with gray? How do you deal with the midpoint phenomenon, gray? All right. So I like the term clinically significant, which does admittedly require clinical judgment, but so does everything else, from stroke to chest pain on down. There's no way around that. If you think that's a reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater, you've proven to me that you're either not a clinician or a weak clinician, period. I'm sorry. That's how it is. Okay. And then the third thing, it's abuse, neglect, or markedly deficient parenting skills. Well, again, there's no such thing as a perfect parent. That's a cliche. Every parent has shortcomings, weaknesses, flaws, imperfections, idiosyncrasies, just to name 5 adjectives. And you can't find one of those and say, there you go, that's why the kid's rejecting. We know children don't do that for trivial reasons. The straw does not break a camel's back. And if you're the evaluator or the therapist or the lawyer or the judge, and you believe that all cases, both parties participated, you'll always find some support for that. But you shouldn't be using a straw that broke the back standard. You should be using was this clinically significant? And you should also be doing a but-for analysis. But for the other parent's manipulation, indoctrination, and undermining, but for the favored parent, would that behavior have ever caused the child to act like this? If the answer is no, then that fails the causation analysis. All right. I'm oversimplifying, but that's the gist of it. All right. So could they be contributing, participating, playing a role? Yeah, that's true for every woman who's ever been raped. She participated and played a role. If you believe being attractive or wearing a short skirt means that now both participated in the rape, or that she's partly responsible for causing it, well, okay, if that's your standard, then A, you're an idiot, and B, that's wrong. But if you apply the exact same tools to this situation, the answer should pop out. I've said this probably 1,000 times when I lecture. I don't claim to have most of the answers. I just will make an unabashed claim to have the questions. And I'm giving you some of the questions now. All right, moving along, factor 4. So factor 4 starts with the 17 famous strategies or behaviors that were codified by Dr. Amy Baker and published independently in research studies, and then are in the book I mentioned earlier, Working with Alienated Children and Families, a clinical guidebook. So I don't think it's really going to be good use of time to tell you what the 17 are. I would just say one can find them easy enough, probably at her website, I would guess. But I am going to say that I like to group them, because I can remember 6 things better than I can remember 17. So write this down if you have the ability, people. It won't be totally satisfying, but it'll get you to second base. So of the 6 that I've memorized, the first is bad mouthing. You know what that is. The second is limiting contact. Again, these are actions from the favored parent that are signs of alienation. They're not definitive in themselves, but they support the hypothesis that the dominant family dynamic is parental alienation. Oh, good. But see, that makes my point that you really do need to simplify this a bit, right? It's a wonderful slide, but I wouldn't want to.
It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. Yeah.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to hand this to a judge and tell him to study it.
Right. But yeah, this is the 17 that Dr. Miller just mentioned.
Right. So I'm showing you that with a little cleverness, you can get them into 6 or 7 categories. So bad mouthing is one, limiting contact's the other. The third one, this is going to be a little bit of a cheat. For me, I call it signs of enmeshment. E for enmeshment, right? And oh, I forgot to tell you, they do make a mnemonic called BLETAL, BLETAL, but I feel I could do better than that, so I wasn't going to say it. But I started with that. Let me make a snappy thing that's 6 or 7 letters, right? So for me, some of the 17 strategies strongly suggest enmeshment. For example, confiding in the child, asking the child to keep secrets, asking the child to spy. You could go through the list and say enmeshment. I don't know how your brain works, but I can remember the word enmeshment easier than the other 4 to 6 things. And if I can remember that, oh, I need to name a few things that are related to enmeshment, that much being an expert myself, I can probably come up with that. But if I'm saying, what was the next thing, I might get into trouble. All right. So then the last 3 that I like, TAL, are all about undermining trust, undermining authority, and undermining love. And it's not a perfect fit with those 6. I'm still toying with a better acronym and maybe throw in a 7th. You know, I would know off the top of my head, for example, that there are 2 related to names, right? First name, calling parent by first name, changing name. It just gives me a little help here, if, you know, especially when I was a little less experienced and couldn't rattle off the 17. So anyway, the final piece to that, so the 17 strategies, and no one is saying that these 5 factors are the be all and end all, or that any one factor is the be all and the end all. You're certainly allowed to consider the total clinical picture. In the chapter I mentioned in Working with Alienated Children and Families, the one I wrote going on 10 years ago, there are 12 axioms, clinical axioms. An axiom is a scientific principle, or mathematical one for that matter. It's something that is so obviously true that it requires no proof. All of mathematics is based on axioms, and a great deal of physics is as well. There's no excuse. You don't have to feel bad that you're relying on axioms that can't be proven. If you think that, there's another evidence that you're not exactly a scientific superstar. All right. Anyone who knows what they're doing realizes that. All right. So I come up with 12 axioms there. And One of them, the first one, is consider the total clinical picture. Consider the total clinical picture. It starts out by explaining that snap judgments can be very dangerous. And that paragraph on consider the total clinical picture ends with a statement something like this. This is one of the most important principles in all of medicine, which is why it is listed first. Now, think of the straw man argument that these guys just assume that if a child's rejecting a parent, it must be people like Miller just assume that that means it's alienation. Well, you can't misrepresent my position worse than that. Let me show you my yellow Post-it notes for the straw man argument again, right? Like I just wrote a 16,000 word book chapter telling people don't do that. And that's axiom one. And it even says, it's listed first for a reason, right? But that's what they say, right? So when you're doing the 17 strategies, here's my overarching point. You are allowed, not only allowed, but you are required to consider all other information. If anyone disagrees with that, whoever they might be, well, I'm sorry, then I have a bone to pick with you. Nobody should just be checking off boxes. That's the worst type of cookbook practice or cookbook medicine I can think of. In addition to the 17 strategies, if the favored parent has a diagnosed problem with alcohol, drugs, or the other parent, whoever it is, or personality disorder or mental illness, all of that should be considered. And when some lawyer challenges, how do you do that? Well, part of the answer should be clinical experience, and part of the answer should be clinical judgment. I'm sticking in the general point that when you're doing any of the factors, including the fourth factor on the behaviors of the alleged alienating parent, who may turn out to not be an alienator. Remember the importance to not making a decision till you've done the proper methodology and due diligence and gathered the evidence. And speaking of methodology, the same chapter I mentioned has a whole section on that. You gather evidence, not just history, but maybe collateral sources, maybe records. You generate hypotheses. You should generate multiple competing hypotheses. You refine your hypotheses. You prune your hypotheses. You discard some. You rank them in order of importance for the others. And then you finally arrive at hypothesis confirmation. You may be ordering tests. So there's a stepwise fashion to approach any clinical situation. And either you've been trained to do that or you haven't. It happens to be a good example of why I say these cases often are not just clinical, they're medical. I'm not telling you need an MD. Some of the best people around doing this they don't even have PhDs. Some of the very best I like, Linda Gottlieb comes to mind. She's double licensed as a therapist, but she does not have either a PhD or an MD. But she really learned the medical principles that you need for this. And I'm telling you what some of them are. I'm giving you probably half of them now. I might have another half, but this is a big deal. If no one ever taught you how to do this, or worse, you think this is bizarre that anyone should do this, or you never heard of it, or you don't see the need for it, that's why we have this mess that we have now. You've got unqualified people out there who don't even know what they don't know. All right. So
yeah, I just want to mention that we are going to be interviewing Linda Gottlieb. She's going to be coming on the show. She's one of the very rare person that was directly trained by Salvador, and also, she has, yeah,
Minuchin.
Mnuchin. Sorry, I didn't know how to say. Yeah, and also she has this program that has been very successful at reuniting family. I just wanted to share this, summarize what you said, and I forgot what does T stand for.
Trust.
Trust. Okay,
You're
thank
fast.
you.
You're making these slides in real time. I'm impressed.
Okay,
Now,
so
I said this is a draft. I really want people to know it's a draft. If you're telling your story, I like people to sometimes have a little crutch. But I'm not sure when I get around to making this widely available that it won't turn into something easier to remember or maybe have 7 points. I've actually discussed this. I have to give a little credit. I stole this from Baker, who once wrote something that she summarizes it in 6 points. And hers were a little bit different than mine. In fact, hers were 5. I'm sure I added the love. But as I said, well, how many do we need? Can we get it into 5? Not really. Maybe 6. I'm trying. Might be 7. But in general, she agreed that it's helpful to try to distill a little bit. Not necessarily if you're the clinician, but if you're trying to explain this to a lawyer, or a judge, or someone else, 17 points is quite a mouthful. So, okay, thank you for that. All right, so moving on. The 5th factor is looking at the child or children. And we just as you start with the 17 strategies for the 4th factor, now you start with 8 manifestations. For those of you who don't speak English as the first language, a manifestation is really just a sign. It's something that you can see. And so there are 8 that are fairly famous, and they're easy to look up. While it's true they were first described by Gardner, they are well validated at this point. And I'm well aware that there are people out there not only claiming that it's all just poppycock and it's never been studied and never been validated. That's a straw man argument, and it's not true. And it's highly misleading. And it also, frankly, shows some fundamental lacks of understanding as to how things work in medicine. So
I just wanted to jump in with that point. I've seen a lot of attack on gardeners, and for me, I'm looking at. I mean, I've done study on over 700 cases of victims, and a lot of them, over 200 cases, that are the adult children of these situations. So to argue that Garner is this and that is no different than saying that Newton was a horrible man. You can deny Newton whichever way you want, but gravity is still real and it still exists.
that's
Like,
a great analogy. And actually, from what I can tell, he was kind of a horrible guy.
I have no idea, but it doesn't matter who he is, right? He discovered gravity. It's something real, and you can deny him.
Well, fair enough. But just as a totally irrelevant point, I think it would be fair to say that Isaac Newton was not known for his, warm and fuzzy humanism, but he certainly got the math and the physics right. So good point. Great analogy. I'm just thrilled to hear you. I never thought of that one. Okay, so I'm going to quickly say what the 8 manifestations are. And so for each one of those, there's another landmine. Remember, I like to say, here's the obvious, here's what's less obvious. And the critics, mostly with straw man arguments, try to attack these in a way that, frankly, it's pseudoscience. And it also shows a profound lack of understanding of how clinical practice is supposed to work. So campaign of denigration. The key word there is denigration, not campaign. So I've heard people claim, well, Your Honor, I don't deny that little Susie has been denigrating her mother, but there's no campaign, as if lack of campaign means you don't meet the criteria, right? Well, actually, Gardner himself was quite clear about that. This list of 8 things is describing severe cases. Early descriptions of a phenomenon usually do describe severe, not only because only the severe is the first thing you notice, but it's also more educational. You want to describe a full-blown case, whether, take heart attacks. I'll keep using that example. Women present differently than men. Since most of the descriptions for heart attacks were crushing chest pain, down the left arm and all that, many, many women don't present that way and they get missed. Diabetics don't present that way. Old people don't present that way. So if you're a simplistic thinker, time out, simplistic doesn't mean simple. It means overly simplified to the point that it's wrong. If you're a simplistic clinician or a simplistic thinker, please stay away from an alienated or possibly alienated child, because that's the last thing we need here. Okay. Anyway, next, the second would be the child offers weak, frivolous, absurd rationalizations. I always like to throw in trivial, weak, frivolous, trivial, or absurd. Um, well, there's where you're going to have a little gray. So you think it's trivial and I don't. Okay, fair enough. That's a midpoint phenomenon. You'll always find some clinician who says the cup's half full and someone else who says it's half empty. Back to what does 90 over 60 mean? Not much in itself. Consider the total clinical picture. Okay. Oh, I can read. Well, you know what? Oh, yeah, I can use your list. Next, lack of ambivalence. Here, the weasel word is lack. The critics will, whether lawyer or whoever, they'll claim, well, there's not a lack. Lack means lack, Dr. Miller. Are you aware that this boy was asked if he could say anything good about his mother? And he said, yes, she was a good cook. Well, that's not a lack of ambivalence. Well, yeah, it is. And she can't say anything else nice, right? Again, black, white, and gray. You have to know how to deal with gray zones or you shouldn't be doing these cases. And every clinician needs to know that. This is not peculiar to alienation. Okay. Next is 4, insist on not being influenced by others. It's actually usually called the independent thinker phenomenon. And now there's a landmine there. Every one of them has landmine. The landmine is actual independent thinker phenomenon is defined to mean that without prompting, the child volunteers. No, and nobody told me to write that letter, and nobody told me to say that, or whatever it might be. If you say, hey Johnny, has anyone been telling you to say these things? And Johnny says, no, that's not independent thinking. What makes this worth emphasizing, I was at a meeting 3 years ago where people, at least 2 of the speakers, were mocking independent thinker phenomenon. I mean, outright mocking it. And one of them said, I don't even know what that is. Who knows what that is? So I went up to the person directing the conference, who was a child psychiatrist, and I said something like, well, if they don't know what it is, why are they mocking you? And by the way, do you know what it is? He didn't know what it is. MD. He said, what is it? So I told him, well, if you don't think that volunteering out of left field, that no one told you to write that letter isn't suspicious, how much weight you give it's another thing. But if you think that's something to mock, again, you shouldn't be allowed within 300 yards of a possibly alienated or abused child. All right, next.
Sorry, hold on. I just wanted to jump in. We have over 150 comments and questions in the chat room, and I apologize, we haven't picked up your questions yet, but please do continue to post your question and comments. We're going to try to, I don't want to interrupt Dr. Miller right now, but when we get to a certain point, I will try to pick up some questions. And then even if we don't pick it up today, I'm going to try to go through and compile the key questions so that when Dr. Miller come back the next time, we can address those key questions. And I also wanted to acknowledge and appreciate that we have, over 90 shares around and all the likes and love. So thank you so much. Please continue to do that and help sharing this so that more parents can actually get access to this information. And I apologize, Dr. Miller, please continue.
Oh, thank you. By the way, let me tell them a secret, the audience. So you asked me how long this would go, or maybe I asked you, and you told me 2 hours. And I said, oh, that seems like a long time. I don't want to bore anyone. I can do it in an hour and a half. And then I think we agreed to play it by ear. I'll leave it up to you, but we're at 80 minutes. If you want to do the 2 hours, I'm fine with it. If you want to not do the 2 hours, I'm fine with that too. You just let me know. But I am trying to budget my time. So what do you want to do? You want to keep going?
Yes, I definitely, I'm not even touched a fraction of my list of questions. And like I mentioned, there's over 150 questions and comments in the chat room. So we have a lot, but I'm going to be respectful of your time. So you let us know when, when we should stop.
No, I have no trouble. I did budget to 2 hours and I am perfectly happy. I was only, I don't like to wear out my welcome or make people suffer through 2 hours when, I'm a cognitive scientist and there have been a lot of studies of adult learners and their attention span. And, some people, no matter how useful something might be, adults tend to like spoon-sized bites and 1 hour at a time. I'll give you a little tip. You're probably better off to do 15 minutes a day for 3 days than a full 1 hour in a session. If you break down the material, I think kids probably learn better that way too, but it's axiomatic for adult learning. Anyway, I'll keep going through this.
Actually, yeah, so in the chat room, people are saying, please continue. I see Cheryl said, please continue. Shia said, not boring at all. Mary said, 2 hours isn't long enough. Desiree, I think, said, the more's better. Gilbert said, please keep going. So, I mean, really, this,
Thank you.
yeah, no, I think
Well,
people,
I'll tell you,
Sharon said, yes,
right.
please.
I'm a scientific medical consultant for people who have these problems, either with or without litigation. And so what I'm doing now is I'm saying, if I did only have 90 or 120 minutes, what are the most important points to know? I'm actually trying to filter that. And I'll actually throw in something else that I feel is relevant. About 7 or 8 years ago, it was January 9th, either 2013 or 2014. I testified at a legislative task force hearing in Connecticut. And I was there by invitation. If you were to just do my name, Alienation Task Force or Connecticut, it's one of the very first hits.
Actually, I'm pretty sure all of the audience have seen that video. Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I tried to keep off the internet. I don't have my own website. Elaine Cobb through Family Access, and certain other people, you can find me through them. But I'm busy, and not that I don't love you all, but I can't be running a website. I'm just too busy. So anyway, back to that day. I was invited as one of just a very small number. I think it was about 3 invited experts to address the legislative hearing. And when I got there, I won't mention names, but someone involved with the hearing really didn't want to hear from these experts. They were investigating abuses in the court system and GALs and other professionals, and the last thing they wanted is someone spelling out. So what that person did was to open up the hearing to anyone who wanted to talk. Like, I drove in at my own expense from another state, and all of a sudden I'm not one of 3 witnesses. I'm one of like 75 or 80 something witnesses, and everyone's getting 3 minutes. So not only did I not start at 9 as I was told I would, but I don't get to testify till 3:30 in the afternoon. And then I'm told I have 3 minutes, but they say, well, wait a minute, we might be able to get you a little more time by asking questions. Now, why am I telling you this story? Because I sat there for 6 hours thinking I had 3 minutes. And I said, if I only have 3 minutes, what is the absolute 2 or 3 most important things anyone would need to know? And I think that actually improved my performance, because if you go back and watch it, you need to know it's child abuse. You need to know it's a clinical, in fact, it's a medical case. You need to know it's counterintuitive, and you need the courts to do something. So I kind of figured out to make my most important points up front, and then make the rest of the whole thing only lasted 20 minutes, even for me, right? Whatever I did. So the result was, people who have added up the various versions tell me, or at least last I checked, that there were more than 125,000 hits. I think that it may have actually helped to have had that unfortunate thing happen, because it forced me to get pithy. And here I'm trying to do that. So let's go back to the eight manifestations. So I'm telling you what the usual reference won't tell you, if and only if it's also important. So now there's no guilt or remorse, which is usually listed as absence of guilt or remorse. And here the weasel word is no. You've got those people who like to create a false dichotomy. And if they can find the kid ever said, oh, I feel bad about that, they come to court and tell the judge, here's an interview with little Johnny, and he said, I do feel bad the way I've treated my mom. Yeah, 1% of the time, and the other 99%, the kid's a monster. But to those people, they think that's a gotcha, right? All right. Next, borrowed phrases. Now, I like what you did here. The original said borrowed scenarios, and I think I could take credit for pointing out that many of the best examples are not scenarios. They're language. I call it borrowed language. So when you have when a 5-year-old tells you dad's a liar or mom's a liar, that might be a borrowed scenario because lying is kind of a scenario. When the kid then adds, try not to laugh, this is a real case. When the kid then pauses for a moment and says, lies upon lies upon lies, that is not how 5-year-olds talk. And that is borrowed language. So that's very helpful. The last one, unless I missed one, I think I got all the rest. So the last one is rejection of extended family and friends, and even pets. And so that's another useful indicator. The kid wants no relationship whatsoever with grandma, grandpa, cousins, aunts, uncles, whomever it may be, for no valid reason. I like the word disproportionate. All of these, you're looking for a reaction that's disproportionate to the actual experiences with the parent. Here again, however, there are more than 8. I could easily name you at least another 8 that are important. And I'm going to just name not many, but I'll quickly mention a few. When I'm looking at a child, I look for what I call the big 3. And the big 3, I put them together as a 3, but I didn't make any of them up and they're well validated. One of them is over-empowerment. That's almost an operational definition of an alienated child. So a good clinician says, whoa, this kid's over-empowered. And a good clinician says, who's doing the over-empowering? It's not the disfavored parent. Who is it? Well, it's obviously the favored parent and the new stepmother. And oh my God, the therapist is doing it too. Listen to the voice of the child. So if you really know how to sort this out, you're doing the extreme opposite of what the people claim with their straw man argument that we just assume anything. The extreme opposite of what they claim we're doing. In fact, we're doing it 10 times more vigorously than they would even know how to do, let alone that they actually do. And I can prove this easy enough by having someone ask them questions. Well, Ms. Dr. Jones, how would you do that? They have no idea about multivalent logic, fuzzy logic, decision-making under uncertainty, weighting evidence, combining evidence, or any such thing. They're doing it intuitively, which is a lead into what I'm about to do with counterintuitive points. I have one last thing to say. Well, sorry, let me do the big 3. So it's over-empowerment, boundary violations. Now, a boundary is a line or limit. An interpersonal boundary is an interpersonal line or limit that you probably shouldn't cross in our culture. We don't come up to people and tell them that they're ugly or that their spouse is ugly, or, I mean, there's common decency here, but it often gets back to boundary violations. Another group of boundary violations is called inappropriate sharing. And here again, deep information is sometimes useful. There are, in simple terms, 3 types of inappropriate sharing, especially in these cases: inappropriate sharing of personal, of legal, and of financial information. And again, you always have to grade severity. So if it's one time, not so bad, everyone slips. If it's a constant nonstop diet, the kid, even a 17-year-old who has all the knowledge of what's going on in court, and the parent says, I thought she should know, or he's very mature now, he's in 12th grade. That doesn't cut it. That's a boundary violation. I think it's still a boundary violation with a 21-year-old. Kids don't belong in the middle of a parental conflict. But for what it's worth, that's the second of the big 3. And then extreme behavior. It amazes me how the extremism gets missed. I coined a term for that years ago. I like to refer to it as extreme extremism. And I did that actually, I think it's okay to say, Larandos edited a manuscript once, Demosthenes, known as Demos Larandos, and we wanted him to look it over. He's a great editor, not just a good one. And when he saw extreme extremism, he crossed it out. Now, you got to know something about Dr. Larandos. He's both a clinical psychologist and a lawyer, and he has 2 PhDs, and one of them is in the philosophy of science. So he's a scientific philosopher, like Thomas Kuhn and those guys, right? So he crosses out extreme extremism. And I called him on the phone and I said, oh, you missed that talk. Every idiot knows to look for extremism. It's one thing to miss a cat in your garage. These people are missing elephants. And he said, oh, okay, I like it now, right? So if you're going to miss the extremism, at least don't miss the extreme extremism. The kid hasn't, the mom's not letting the boy see his dad, and they haven't laid eyes on each other for 2 years or 3 months or whatever. That isn't the usual, I got mad, so screw you this weekend, right? Okay. So to summarize big three: over-empowerment, boundary violations, extremism, especially if it's extreme extremism. Right now, another three are signs of enmeshment, which I don't have a lot of time to talk about now, but I'll just say they're on the list of things to look for in both the child and either parent. So what does enmeshment mean? A simple definition would be that in this context, very important qualification, for our purposes, when dealing with an aligned child and a parent, enmeshment means that the parent has essentially hijacked the child's mind, body, and soul. That's how I like to say it. Another way to say it would be co-opted the child, taken over the child. All right. What does that mean? Well, when you look at the parents usually have defining characteristics. And this is just hypothesis generation. No one assumes this. Kids could be aligned for good reasons, right? But if you're trying to sort out the case, what I'm trying to do is tell you how an experienced clinician, in my own personal case, an experienced clinician who by coincidence is a physician, that is really nothing more than a coincidence here. Also a coincidence, in my younger days, the main thing I did was, at least in terms of the psych stuff I did, was focused on personality disorders. Wherever I was, it might be ER, it might be, whatever, teaching. But the one thing I would have told you in 1990 I was pretty good at in psych would have, or at least what I was better than the next guy, would have been personality disorders. So I came with that accidental background. And the third piece of the accident is I've taught clinical reasoning for 40 years, hundreds of courses. You don't think I'm making this stuff up without notes right now, right? So the reason I can share this with you in what I hope is coherent fashion is I've directed hundreds of courses on this. So you can't say to me, I'm a psychologist. I don't think any of this pertains to me, because psychology is different. No, it's not. And I should know, right? So stop saying that. You don't know what you're saying. All right. So back to enmeshment. So when you look at a suspected parent who may be enmeshed, and you're only generating the hypothesis, I wonder if these people could be enmeshed, the 3 children and dad, or the 2 children and mom. The one sign is boundary violations. Enmeshment is defined as poor boundaries. In fact, some people, and I would come close to being one of them, would define pathological enmeshment as, let me think how to explain it, as you have not only violated the child's boundaries, mom or dad, but you have obliterated them. You've erased them. That you and the child have no normal, healthy boundaries. The child is now an extension of you. So that's what bad enmeshment looks like. I'm not sure there's anything called good enmeshment, but you might say mild to, you certainly could grade severity. All right. Now, another feature is almost invariably the people are pathologically dependent. Normal people don't get enmeshed with their minor children. They don't turn them into friends instead of children. And another defining feature is a large percent of enmeshed parents clearly meet standard definitions for a personality disorder. Most commonly cluster B, most commonly borderline or narcissist. While we're talking about personality disorders, you won't have too much trouble finding some people with other personality disorders, sociopath for sure, paranoid sometimes for sure. But again, this is why we need advanced clinical understanding. You're trying to sort out a mess. right? So
Actually, you
that,
just addressed a few questions in the chat room about the personality disorder. So thank you for bringing that up. I know a few parents was asking about, does the alienators have anything to like? Does the personality disorder has something to do with the
yeah.
alienator? Yeah.
Well, I'll give everyone a sound bite on that because I'm trying to remember what I said about what's the need to know versus nice to know. All right, so here's a little sound bite because it's both relevant to the personality disorders, at least cluster B disorders, and I don't care what you call it, but there's a group of four. I left out the fourth one, which is called histrionic. You're overly dramatic and all that. Um, but the alienating parents tend, if they're going to have one, the severe ones almost always do. The ones they have are one or more of the cluster Bs with a fairly good representation of cluster A in one way. Cluster A includes paranoid personality disorder, right? So, odd eccentric is cluster A, and dramatic erratic is cluster B. And that's all you need to know for now about this. So, the trick I want to give you is everything in psychiatry and psychology can be distilled into three groups. And as usual, I didn't come up with any of this. I might sometimes name it or make an acronym. I'll settle for that's my contribution. But I call that the psychological triad. And it is thinking, feeling, and acting. I'm only taking credit for calling it psychological triad. Anyone in psychology, and I'm quite certain, including Petra, knows full well that thinking, feeling, and acting is what we're dealing with. And if you want to get fancy, then it's cognitive, emotional, and behavioral. And if you want to get pretentious, then it's cognitive, affective, and behavioral. Affective simply means emotional. So, I try not to use words like affective, but it means emotional. And I'd rather say thinking, feeling, acting, or if I have to say cognitive, emotional, and behavioral, that's fine too. Now, for the personality disorders, at least cluster B, here's the short version. This is mostly, this is best applied to borderlines, but it works for the others. And for each one, this is directed to any clinicians out there now, maybe also other professionals. Um, Remember what I said earlier, that if you have a simple template like a mnemonic or something, you might have a lot of information in your head and this helps you get it out. It's kind of like that. Uh, Once you know that people in cluster B, especially borderlines and especially narcissists, have cognitive distortions, then when you're talking about cognitive, the next word is distortions. Now, any good psychologist could probably tell you the cognitive distortions that tend to be highly suggestive of a borderline versus a narcissist, right? So the narcissist will have grandiose sense of himself or a sense of entitlement, and there's 9 criteria in the DSM, and supposedly you need 5 out of the 9, which also fails to understand the fuzzy midpoint stuff, because really bad 4 is probably more impressive than kind of has 6. But that's again why you want strong clinicians. All right, so cognitive distortions. In the middle category, emotional dysregulation. And in the third category for behavior, it tends to be extreme or bizarre behavior. There's a saying in psychiatry, if you're bewildered because the patient is bizarre, you're probably dealing with a borderline. And that's literally true. You don't know that for sure. Back to the strong man argument, you never assume that. But when I keep thinking, oh my God, he's telling me the stuff that makes him look horrible and he thinks I'm impressed, right? Start thinking personality disorder. Start thinking maybe BPD, maybe NPD. Okay, so I'm going to summarize what I'm doing now. Okay, what I just said. All right. So under the cognitive emotional behavioral, for cluster B, cognitive distortions, emotional dysregulation, and or at least abnormal emotion, and either extreme, bizarre, or eccentric behavior. Now, I'm oversimplifying because the sociopath might have emotional dysregulation. They might go out and get mad, impulse control, kill you. But they might have the opposite. They don't really feel the emotions. They lack empathy. They can commit murder without shaking a hand, meaning trembling, right? So again, I'm oversimplifying and I'm generalizing, but it's a very useful template. And if I ever, when I have to let, I think one reason I can summarize things for non-clinicians such as courts is I've given 2,500 lectures, and a lot of them for well, there were a few dozen for lay people, but a lot of them were for nurses and paramedics and non-physicians. So I know the need to simplify, and I advise any of you telling your story to keep that in mind. You're better off to say thinking, feeling, and acting than to start talking about cognitive, emotional, and behavioral unless you really know what you're doing. All right, so I'm going to flesh it out just a little more. If you were talking about a borderline, then someone like me or Petra would know, okay, well, for one thing, they tend to use emotional reasoning. And they use a type of emotional reasoning. This might be new to even some psychologists. They use a type of emotional reasoning that is not what most people think of. The way I'm using the term, if they feel it's true, that makes it true. It's not too emotional. It's not the 20-year-old boy who's in love with the pretty 17-year-old, even though she's, bad for him. I'm talking about facts don't matter. If you feel it's true, it's true. If you feel you were abused, you were abused. If you feel you were raped, you were raped. If you feel that you're the better parent, you're the better parent. Facts don't matter. One author wrote, facts follow emotions. And it is so irrelevant that I was once helping with a mediation where one parent was claiming that when they sold the house, that parent had gotten, taken advantage of. And I said, hey, hang on a minute. Do we have a closing statement? And the parent had actually gotten 100 cents on the dollar and was still complaining that he'd gotten screwed. And when confronted with the closing statement, it made no difference. Never mind the fact that you got everything. You still got screwed because he felt screwed. Right? That's okay. That's highly characteristic of borderlines. Imagine how dangerous they are in an interview, or worse, how dangerous they are to a GAL or an evaluator who thinks they can sort out false from true allegations by reading the person. If you're delusional, you're not going to show signs of lying. And if you're using that type of emotional reasoning, the same. Okay, I'm back to my main theme. This is not something that should be done by novices. And by novices, I mean clinicians who don't specialize in this. Novices in this field, not the greatest psychiatrist in the world who doesn't see this. All right. So I'm still doing cognitive. They use primitive defense mechanism. I don't want you to learn all this. I'm just giving you a consciousness raising session. So borderlines are famous for primitive defense mechanisms. That means things like denial, projection, splitting. But a lot of people may miss the fact that projection is a form of blame shifting. Everyone knows what projection is. Did you know, Your Honor, that it also covers blame shifting, or sometimes, right? Splitting, we all know, is black-white thinking, but pathological splitting suggests that it's abnormal. We all do some splitting. Sorting out where the line between normal and abnormal is, again, that's why you want a pro who sees it all the time. All right. Now, I could give you more. Borderlines tend to be pathologically dependent. They tend to have certain types of delusions, including paranoid delusions. They tend to have a poor sense of self, identity disturbance. Again, there's 9 criteria. If you use the simplistic approach of needing 5 out of 9, and you're a cookbook clinician, you can check off the boxes, which isn't really a bad thing to do. But when you do that for an alienation case, you're already walking on eggshells or whatever it is. You're playing with fire, because this is not easy to do, especially for someone who isn't thoroughly familiar with everything I've said so far today. And I mean thoroughly. Oh yeah, actually, this comes from me. Did you know that The anxious, agitated, angry, and afraid.
It said right at the top, Dr. Stephen Miller's.
Oh, how about that? Yeah, okay. Well, again, what I try to do is simplify. So it's pattern recognition. I like that term for court. If you need sophisticated specialty level pattern recognition, this is a good example why. Ordinarily, if one parent presents well with the 4 C's, cool, calm, charming, and convincing, and the other parent is letting it all hang out and you want to leave the room, I just couldn't stand another minute with her because of the 4 A's, anxious, agitated, angry, and afraid. The average person thinks that the better parent is the calm one. And the calm one is the sociopath and the manipulator. And the other one is the victim with the PTSD or something like it. So unless you're super savvy and you know that pattern, you're going to get it wrong right there in the first interview. So again, there's so many illustrations of this that I really could probably have done 4 hours, but I wouldn't inflict that on anyone. Okay, so what I just gave you is the big three, and now I'm going to throw in I was defining enmeshment. And so I described an enmeshed parent. They're too close. They're not just close, they're too close. And one of the dirty 13 or dirty 30 is non-specialists will almost always mistake pathological enmeshment for healthy bonding. I don't use a word like almost always or phrase like almost always lightly. Show me an evaluator who's not a specialist, either that or near genius for being smart, or at least on the way to being an expert, right? Show me that person and I will show you an evaluator who not only gets the case wrong, but gets it backwards. Because, one parent comes in, the kid and the parent are holding hands, the parent's rubbing the kid's back. That winds up in the report as, mom or dad showed great empathy. And in contrast, the other parent didn't, right? Well, it's 4 A's and 4 C's, pattern recognition. All right. So let me go back to where I was. When you still on enmeshment, when you look at the child, you find a child who has lost his or her sense of self. The child is now an extension of the parent. The child is not only being used as a proxy and a pawn for the parent, the child is being used as a weapon. The child has been weaponized by the parent. And still, the evaluator writes a glowing report for the enmeshed parent, claiming that there was a healthy bond between mother and child that was almost entirely absent, between the father and child. And this is gender neutral, of course, right? So whatever it is, they've confused pathological enmeshment for healthy bonding. Literally the worst mistake you could make, other than getting it all backwards. That's one of the main reasons they'll probably get it backwards. And worse, when someone like me or Gottlieb or Burnett kind of point out they got it backwards. Since they're intuitive thinkers, and since intuitive thinking feels right, they then have great confidence in their incorrect conclusions. If you connect those dots, it's a recipe for disaster. So let me finish describing the enmeshed child, and then I'm going to go to the least dirty dozen or dirty 13. Let's see how my time is. So I can do it. Okay. So when you look at the child, they've lost their sense of self. They've lost their identity. These are enmeshed children. They almost by definition, they've lost their individuality. They've lost their independence. They've lost their autonomy, and they've lost their critical reasoning skills, among other things. The child essentially is an extension of the enmeshed parent. The child has been weaponized. The child has essentially been obliterated as an independent, autonomous individual. It's hard to imagine anything worse for the development of a child or adolescent than that. And hence, I once wrote a short little throwaway article. You can get it from the Family Access website. When I say throwaway, I just mean it's not a peer-reviewed formal thing, but it's on boundary violations often missed, often dismissed. And the last thing anyone should do is miss boundary violations in these cases. And worse, they're usually obvious if you're looking for them and if you know one when you see it. Okay, so enmeshment has 3 types. I'm going to give myself one more minute on enmeshment. The child can be infantilized, treated like they're younger than their stated age. Parents often do that to make the kid dependent. One sign of it would be, you're talking to your 17-year-old as if the kid's a little baby. Oh, you little honey, you're my little darling. I'm not saying that proves anything, but, it makes me wonder. More commonly, the child is adultified, related to overempowerment. You're treating the child as a friend and a colleague, part of your support system. Never mind that the kid's 5, 10, 15, even 20. Your child's not your friend. Your child's your child. I got grown children. I don't go share my relationship problems if I needed to. All right. And then the third type of enmeshment is parentification. I was discussing a case today where the kid's, case that's going to wind up litigated sooner or later. And the children were described as being very defensive of mom. Well, they weren't just defensive of mom. They were parentified. They thought it was their role to protect mom, and they can't see dad because they need mom will miss them all weekend. And how do you trigger this in a kid? Subtly. Watch this. Oh, Susan, you're going to be spending this weekend with your dad. I'm going to miss you so much. I'm going to count the minutes till you come home. That's all you need. And by the way, I have my cell phone if you need me, right? That it's done subtly. And anyone, again, you miss that, you miss not only alienating behavior, but you miss the possible enmeshment. All right, so let me go through a few of the counterintuitive points. I'm going to do this quickly, more as an introduction. We could always go into more detail. I'm trying to find a balance between detail and
Actually, there's a slide deck that you did for this 13 counterintuitive points. So I'm going to put that link as well as the article that you mentioned on family access. I'm going to put that link onto the description of this videos. This video is going to be available. The recording is still going to just stay on Facebook. So we'll put the links to these for parents to get access to it. I know that we're kind of running tight on time. So can I go into, let's walk away from this and go into the question about, okay, what now for parents? Let's talk about parenting skill reunification, that kind of things. Could we? Yeah.
I'm going to do that, but there's one of the counterintuitive points that I've made number one now.
Yes,
And I
please.
think it's so important that if you'll allow me just a few seconds.
No, please take your time. Yeah.
Okay. So what I now have is number one on my list is using the high conflict model. The teaching point is don't do that. Non-use of the high conflict model. What the high conflict model means is that the professionals, mental health, legal, whatever, they think these are just two people who can't get along. And if they only could put their needs.
Oh, I think we lost a minute. Are you there?
Each other. And once you start out seeing these cases through the lens of a high conflict model, and you assume both parties played a relatively equal role, or at least a significant role, and that explains the kid, and that explains everything, it's a recipe for disaster. It's also unethical. But it's in such widespread use that I'm done. But you really have to teach these people using the high conflict model starts with a conclusion. It's circular reasoning. Please, it's a logical fallacy. That's the number one thing that's counterintuitive. And the mental health and legal professionals tend to be dismissive when I say that, at least some of them are, because they see it all the time. It might be a good model 90% of the time or more, but it's a disaster if the actual problem is alienation or something like it. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to you again.
Oh, no, thank you. That's great. And that's such a great point because when you say high conflict, you're implying that two parents are both creator of this conflict. But in alienation, a lot of the time, it's just one parent and the other parent just try to survive in dealing with this attack. So, yeah.
And let me add, people who do that tend to make another clinical and cognitive error. Their standard tends to be straw that broke the camel's back. And what I mean by that is they find something that the other parent did, and then they declare that it's either a hybrid or that's his contribution, that's her contribution. One straw doesn't break a camel's back. And so in order to justify their use of the high conflict model, anyone doing that, and it also justifies what I call the holy hybrid hypothesis, sarcastically implying, I don't think much of well, it's certainly true they're hybrids. definitely true, right? But the people who say all cases are hybrids, or I've seen hundreds of cases and only one of them wasn't a hybrid. Yeah, the only way you could believe that is you think a straw can break the camel's back. So you'll always find some imperfection, some shortcoming, and that doesn't mean that the parent contributed in a meaningful way, or if you do a forensic causation analysis, a proper causation analysis, that's causally connected. We have law, we have statutes and laws on how to do causation analysis in this country, and straw that broke the camel's back is not how you do it. So I'm going to stop again back to you. I'm trying to raise people's consciousness that you're, more to this than might meet the eye.
Thank you. And I definitely like. Please do come back because we now have over 200 questions and comments, and I do want to go back in the list of questions later and compile a list of like the key questions for when you come back. But anyway, so I wanted to now, if we can go in the little bit of time that we have left, to kind of dig into what parents can do in terms of parenting. So let's talk about a few scenarios. Let's say you can still have some contact with the child. What can we do as parents? How do we deal with the child in this situation?
Okay, I'm going to give you some short, concise advice. We all know, including I'm sure all 200 people who wrote questions and every single person who's listening, we all know that you're not going to have a simple solution to this complicated problem. So I'll just say a few words about that, if that's okay. I think, first of all, you have to understand that the child is not a free agent. The child, I know you've had Stan Claywar on, and he, along with his wife, Bryn Rivlin, wrote a wonderful book. It's the largest study I know of called on alienation, called Children Held Hostage. The subtitle is Identifying Brainwashed Children, Presenting Your Case and Crafting Solutions. Love that book. And you have to remember the title of that book. Your child is a hostage. Your child has been brainwashed. The first 2 chapters have the word brainwashing in them. So it's an actual scientific, proper term of art, brainwashing, right? So you try, it's hard for some people, I know, but try to remember your child is the victim here, more so even than you. Try to understand the child is not a free agent. The child has no choice. This is not your real child. It's almost like the aliens have taken over the child's body, children too. Okay, then try to feel a little understanding, if not compassion and empathy for the other parent. Chances are they have a mental disorder. Probability wise, chances are it's a personality disorder. And if it's a cluster B disorder, that is a horrible thing to have. People with cluster B disorders will describe horrible emotional distress frequently, if not all the time. They're good at hiding it. They may be in denial, but they're not inwardly happy people. I don't find it hard to have some compassion, even for, well, maybe the worst of them, I'll make an exception, but some of the people with BPD are actually very nice people, but they have emotional dysregulation, cognitive distortions. They can't control their behavior, impulse control, lots of other abnormal behavior. I do really feel sympathy for them. And if you can muster that, it may help you to deal with it. A third point, and I could stop with this one, but if you know how to deal with them, meaning people with personality disorders or alienated children, you don't want to trigger them. If you understand what I just said about their underlying problems, for the child, they're caught in the middle. No sense scolding the child when the child has to go back to the hostage taker or the manipulator, right? And no sense debating something with the other parent who's quasi-psychotic. I actually have 2 or 3 subpoints that are really helpful to many people. In psychiatry, there's a saying, in fact, I once had to give a talk, and my brother's a clinical psychologist, and I said, Bob, what's the number one thing anyone should ever know? It was a talk to paramedic students, EMT students, right? So they're really lay people. It took him 1 second to say, never try to talk anyone out of their psychosis. Right? This is more than 30 years ago. I never try to talk anyone out of their psychosis, right? So if you think you're going to sit down and rationally explain to a delusional, possibly psychotic or quasi-psychotic, borderline narcissist, sociopath, whatever, that logic somehow is going to kick in. Let's throw in, they use emotional reasoning, not logical analysis. And you're going to explain how this is bad for our child and it's actually abuse. And here are the definitions, and you need to stop. Good luck to you with that. That's why BPD and sociopathy and other cluster B disorders are so difficult to treat. And if your therapist is doing that, who thinks you can, you know, never try to talk anyone out of their psychosis. If the therapist thinks he or she can do that, I doubt any therapist would not know that. But if that's what's going on, maybe the psychosis isn't quite so obvious. That's not a good idea. Another bit of advice, I said, don't trigger them. I have a way of explaining this. I say, don't take the bait, never take the bait, and don't, or almost never, debate. The better response, if they tell you something you don't agree with, is, well, okay, thank you for sharing, or let me think about that, or I understand, I hear you. Don't trigger them. You're not going to change their mind about anything. Probably. Now, a therapist might have some luck in the office, but we also know that's why traditional therapy fails almost always, because the therapist thinks that CBT or DBT is going to change an obsessed alienator. Well, it might a little bit if they're not too severe, but they better be on the better side of moderate. If they're on the wrong side of moderate or severe, I think I actually said all those years ago in Connecticut, I called it a fool's errand. And a few weeks later, a lawyer came in, a fool's errand, as if somehow that was hyperbole. And I said to the lawyer, yeah, right, actually, that wasn't a slip of the tongue. You're going to spend, anyway, you all get the idea. So in a nutshell, you've got to learn to manage these people. You might want to talk to a coach or a therapist about how not to trigger them. You don't have to patronize them, but you need to understand them, and you need to know what does and doesn't trigger them, and maybe have some rhetorical devices, things you can say like, I hear you, or let me think about that, or if I were you, I might feel the same way. There's things a therapist could teach you, but the therapist should have a good understanding of not only the personality disorder issue, but what those things look like in alienating parents. So let me stop there, and that's probably
So
the best I could do in a short while.
yeah, so you mentioned about, understand your child, have a compassionate look at the understanding that your child is a traumatized child being caught in the middle. You're talking about understanding the alienator because they suffer potentially suffer from a personality disorder. You're talking about don't trigger, don't take the bait. So there's a lot of don't. What do you advise parents to do to connect with the child? Because the child now is obviously, like you mentioned, under this loyalty conflict, and the child may be turning up to the house but don't talk to you, close the door, go into the bedroom all day, don't interact. So what can alienated parents do to reach out and connect and building even tiny little bit of that connection?
Well, first, let me say you are such a good interviewer. That's one of the best questions I've ever had.
Oh, thank
Not
you.
just because it was a good question, because you really focused me on the piece that I didn't really address well. I did tell you what not to do. So very good for you. Good
Thank you.
that you asked that. So I think you need to develop a repertoire of skills, behaviors, and rhetorical devices that are in your back pocket, and they are ready to go when you need them. And you might even practice them. You could practice them with a trusted friend, or even better yet, a skilled coach or therapist. And I'll give you a few examples. So when you're not taking the debate, what do you do? When you're not taking the bait, well, I think it's good to empathize. It won't get you as far as many people think it will, but you should listen, and you should convey that you've listened. Like, I hear you, Johnny. Now, if Johnny's just told you to, drop dead, then you don't say, I hear you, right? You got to have a little common sense here. But if Johnny's just said, I don't want to see you, I don't want to see you, I think you'd say, I hear you, but look, I love you. And let's not have an argument right now. That's just one rhetorical device. There are many, many more. I'm just modeling. All right. Now, if he then says, well, screw you, and locks himself in his room, don't go knocking on the door and demanding to talk. If a therapist told you that's what to do, that might be an exception. It's usually not a good idea. But you want to convey sympathy and concern and empathy and good listening skills. The problem isn't when therapists encourage that. The problem is when therapists rely on it, right? So if you're dying of some infection and you need to go to the operating room, I'm going to still give you antibiotics, but I don't rely on that. I'm taking you to have your right lung removed or whatever it might be. I'm not a surgeon, not that I could do that. Okay. But so another way to do this is to use humor. Now here, the person has to, some people it kind of comes natural to them and others it doesn't. Don't try to fake it if you're not someone good at making others smile. But sometimes when a kid's being persnickety, you might say, I'll give you one or two examples. If the kid's being kind of persnickety in a not horrible way, you could say, if you keep doing that, I'm going to have to give you the look. And the look, what do you mean? The look? Yeah. It's sort of a Kenan Thompson from Saturday Night Live. Yeah, I'm going to have to give you a look. And the kid goes, what's the look? I don't know if I did that well at all, right? Another thing, I know when my kids were younger, we were at the mall with a bunch of their friends, and one daughter was a little bossy. We got along fine, but she was kind of bossy. And she said, Dad, come here. And I just said, woof. And it was like, don't do that. Oh my God, you mortified teenager with that. So I learned that if I wanted her to behave, I just had to say one woof and I said, don't do that again. That was my own little thing, but I'm not recommending it to anyone else. There are other ways of using humor. Moving on. I think you can say, I would love to speak with you about this, and I really would. We can set a time and a place, but this isn't it. If the kid's making a scene with a pickup or a drop off or whatever, look, come on, let's just talk about, how about if we talk about it over dinner or whatever it might be. It's what you do with little kids, but you can do it with big kids. It's sort of a distract thing, or give a simple choice. This is basic parenting 101. Do you want the blue socks or the red socks? Narrow it down. Look, we can't talk about it now. How about a kid who's demanding to talk about a legal issue? I can't talk about that with you, but if you wanted to bring it up next week when we see Dr. Freud, I'd be happy to talk with you about it, but I'm very uncomfortable. Now, you can make I statements too. I don't want to start pretending I'm a therapist now, but saying, look, I hear you, but I'm not comfortable with that. Or I hear you, but I don't want to put you in the middle. Or I want to be in the middle. Well, okay, but I'm not comfortable with that. The short answer here is you want to develop rhetorical devices, sound bites, things that ideally your therapist would agree with. Plus, I'm going to give you the name of 3 books that I do like very much.
Yes, I was going to ask you for resources where parents can look up on this, please.
So the first one I like is called How to Talk So Children Will Listen, and How to Listen So Children Will Talk. The 3 I'm going to give you are well-known cliches. They're all available on our Amazon. How to Talk So Children Will Listen, and How to Listen So Children Will Talk. I hope I didn't get that backwards. I don't think I did. The second one, oh, there you go. I got it right. Okay. The second one, and I mean this literally, has the absolute best title of any book ever published in the English language. If you can show me a book with a better title than this, I will, I don't know, eat a dollar bill. The title is it's mainly for adolescents. Get Out of My Life. But first, would you drive me and Cheryl to the mall? Pull that one up. There it is. Get Out of My Life. But first, I want people to see it. But first, could you drive me and Cheryl to the mall? Oh my God, is that great, right? It sums up a certain type of adolescent. All right. And for those of you with somewhat younger kids, uh, the ABC, magic book, which one I mean there. It talks about giving timeouts and all that. That's more of a general parenting book. So I don't want to get into general parenting. But oh wait, I do have one other technique, one other book. Um, this is good for dealing with the other parent as well as dealing with the kids. Some of you are going to laugh, but Dr. Phil McGraw has a book out called Relationship Rescue. I think it's from about 20 years ago. I want to say 2002. Relationship Rescue, Dr. Philip McGraw. Let's see if I'm right about the 2000. There you go. 2001. Well, that's even more about 20 years ago. Okay. This is a great book. I never heard of him when this came out. I read the book and I come in and I say to my admin one day, oh, I just read a great book. I don't remember who wrote it. I don't know. It's called Relationship Rescue. And she says, well, you don't know who wrote it? I said, all I know is he uses his first name, Dr. First Name. And she says, Dr. Phil McGraw? I go, yeah. She says, you idiot. He's on Oprah. He's on Oprah every Tuesday. Like, what do I know? I'm a doctor. I work for a living, right? Anyway, it's a real good book. And what he does is forget whether it's your relationship. He teaches you rhetorical devices like, I've been taking a long, hard look at myself. And you know what? I think I need to make some changes. I don't even think he's a clinical psychologist, but no one can deny he's both smart and articulate. So at that point, I became a little bit of a Dr. Phil fan. And I think that's a nice book for any relationship, whether it needs rescuing or not. So I'll leave it at that for 3 books. Very pragmatically, when someone asks you what you're doing to work on your parenting skills, you ought to have an answer. And having read books is an answer. Doing an online course is an answer. Having a coach is an answer. Doing a live course when the COVID thing goes away, that's another good answer. So all of those are really helpful. They're not just, fluff.
Thank you. So for parents, we're going to be posting the links to these 3 books with the video. So don't panic. We'll make sure we'll post the links for you guys. Okay, so we talk about the scenario where parents still have some kind of contact. So let's talk about the situation where I know, for example, you are working with Linda Gottlieb in her program. So where you have the situation where parents have now successfully won the custody case where they have a 90-day or a period of time with no contact with the alienators, and now that they go into the intensive reunification program, what are the principle of the reunification program?
Well, that's a good point. You're asking a good question. You're asking really, why do traditional therapies not work and highly specialized therapies can be strikingly effective? Now, Linda has, if you follow her protocol, and almost all the cases do, but an occasional one doesn't, meaning they don't enforce the no contact period, or they don't do something else that's mandatory within her program. If you follow her clinical protocol, her success rate is close to 100%. I'll leave a little wiggle room, 95 to 100, because you'll always have that gray zone where was that a success or not? But if you define success appropriately, her program and certain others that are a lot like it are strikingly effective, and traditional therapies are rarely, if ever, effective. Now, since I know you had Dr. Klewar on, I have memorized a sentence from the book, Children Held Hostage. It is on page 27 of the preface, XXVII. And watch this. I'm looking at the camera. I'm obviously not reading anything. Our research continues to confirm that even under court order, traditional therapies are of little, if any, benefit in regard to treating this form of child abuse, unquote. Now, the same page had just told you that this was a study of 1,000 children over more than 30 years. And I think it's closer to 35 years, right? And so think of the phrase little, if any, benefit. Basically, to oversimplify a bit, they were basically 0 for 1,000. Did Dr. Clewar pretty much agree with the 0 for 1,000 thing I'm now saying?
Yes. So for parents, what Dr. Miller is referring to is Dr. Stanley Clewa. We brought him in and interviewed him before. You can find the recording in our video tab. And Dr. Clewa is coming back on the 21st of May. So in 3 weeks, he's going to come back as well. So, and the book is called, Selma, I saw your question. The book is called Children Held Hostage.
Right.
Yeah.
Children held hostage, identifying brainwashed children, presenting a case and crafting solutions. And is a very, very wonderful book. All right. So, and a well done study. It was published by the American Bar Association, not exactly something that, he had self-published with a vanity publisher, for example, right? And my point is little, if any, benefit for 1,000 children. I read the book as basically 0 for 1,000. Now, if Stan Clewar would say, well, I wouldn't say no kid ever benefited at all. I'm not saying that either. But if you're looking for good outcomes, pretty much 0 for 1,000. And I think it would also be important to say that if you did have any, the little benefits, probably not for severe kids, right? Because I've never, that tape we mentioned that I did for Connecticut 7 or 8 years ago.
Yes.
At one point, I made the same statement. And I put my hands up like this, and I said, if you think that you've been having success with severely alienated children using anything that looks like a traditional therapy, I await your data, right? Well, I've been waiting for 7 or 8 years, and I haven't seen any such data. That's something I used to do when I gave other kind of medical lectures. When people would make pseudoscientific claims, I would say, I await your data, right? Well, I'm still waiting. It's like 8 years, not a single case. So,
Right.
They're basically, if you're going to treat it successfully, it looks nothing like traditional family therapy. Now, to make you laugh once, again, hopefully someone's laughed once at least so far. When you confront a therapist with what I just said, little if any benefit, 1,000 kids, what are we doing that would make you think this will work, doctor? Or whoever the therapist is, a common answer is, well, I'm not doing traditional therapy. Oh, what are we doing? We're doing family therapy. Really? You think out of 1,000 kids over almost 35 years, most of them weren't getting some kind of family therapy, or at least a lot of them, right? That's exactly what doesn't work. Now, I have to do a timeout. Do not, you told me not to stress what not to do, but I'm going to break that rule. Do not go in there and tell your therapist he or she doesn't know what they're doing, and this doesn't work, and here's a book called Children Held Hostage. If you're going to do this, you need, first of all, you probably shouldn't be the one to do it. Maybe someone else should help you, a lawyer, whatever. If you're going to do it, you sell yourself first before you sell your opinions. That's an axiom in life, let alone business or anything else, right? You can't go walking in the first interview, letting it all hang out. When they ask you what's going on, do not start reciting a list of 17 strategies and 8 behaviors and all that. And the answer should be, I think she's undermining me. How's she doing that? She's manipulating the kids, right? Do give short answers and bond a little. Show that you're a reasonable person. If you're bouncing off the wall with the 4 A's, work on that. Because again, you're not going to sell your ideas until you sell yourself. And you certainly have to know timing. You can't just walk in and tell an experienced licensed therapist they don't know what they're doing, and you know better, and this doesn't work, and you need to do that. All right. So that having been said, here's a few reasons why traditional therapy doesn't work and what does. What traditional therapy generally does is it further empowers the over-empowered child, which is pretty much on the short list of worst things you could possibly do. Think of everything else I just told you about the child. Over-empowered, boundary violations, extreme behavior. Now, what the therapist is trained to do is to follow certain rules that, they don't even work well for marriage counseling, but they were developed for marriage counseling. and they're not even that good for marriage counseling. The therapists love them because at least they've got some techniques. I once pointed out that the techniques were shown not to be particularly effective, and not my marriage counselor, just a colleague, and said, yeah, but no one else has any other techniques. Well, okay, that's not a reason to use ineffective techniques. Anyway, to the extent they work at all for marriage counseling, they don't work at all, or they backfire, or they don't work much for alienation, and they usually make things catastrophically worse. So back to where we were. If the primary problem is that the child is overempowered, you shouldn't make your therapy sessions, now, Mom, I want you to listen closely to what Susan is saying. Susan, could you tell your mom what you're so upset about? Yeah, I don't like the way you cook, and I don't like this, and I don't like that. Now, Mom, can you tell Susan that you heard her? What I hear you saying is that you're very upset with the way I parent you, and you don't like the way I cook, and you feel I'm too strict, and things are different at Dad's house, and you feel very upset about that. Do I have that right? Yes, you do. The therapist is encouraging this. It's harmful. And then you say, well, by the way, it's called mirroring, empathizing, and validating. So that was the mirroring. And then the empathize, Harville Hendricks, getting the love you need or the love you want. I think it's the love you need. No, I think it's the love you want. Well, whatever. So anyway, getting the love you need or want. Harville Hendricks plus another author. All right. So now here's empathizing. Well, I can see why you might feel that way. And here's validating. If I were you, I would probably feel the very same way. Well, I'm going to get technical for therapists and people out there. John Gottman has commented on that. John Gottman, the leading researcher in marriage counseling, in his book, The 7 Principles That Make Marriage Work, in the introduction or first chapter says, the only problem with that technique is, quote, it doesn't work, unquote. That's from Gottman, my God, right?
That's the only thing. It's the only thing.
Yeah, right. So even John Gottman doesn't think that mirroring, validating, and empathizing, I actually still kind of like it as a technique, to be fair to Harville Hendricks and, all that. It has its place. I'll get back to something I said an hour ago. You can do it, just don't rely on it, right? If your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. I kind of like mirroring, validating, and empathizing. But if the kid's telling you the kid's telling you to drop dead and go do an unnatural act or something like that, that's not the time to validate the kid's delusions. And unfortunately, I'm exaggerating a bit, but in effect, that's what most therapists do. So they further overempower the overempowered kid. Then they turn to the other parent, and back to, if your only tool is a hammer, they work on parenting skills. They teach the parent to listen and to empathize and maybe a little mirroring, validating, and all that. Well, but the problem is that the parent there's been a reversal of the power hierarchy in the family, so that the child is now higher than the rejected parent. So what you need to do is reestablish the rejected parent as a parent. You need to re-empower and reauthorize the rejected parent. And the way that is done is, Susan, you just disrespected your father. I need you to apologize. Well, Susan, I'm going to give you a little time to think about that. Why don't you think about that for about 30 seconds or so, maybe a minute even. And at the end of that time, I'm going to be hoping for an apology. And now I'm not saying you start out like this for those therapists watching, but at some point the answer is, and if I don't hear that apology, I'm afraid you'll be leaving your cell phone behind with me tonight. And you get authorization, and you may need a court order. Again, you're gentle with the child, but you're firm. You don't let the session become a bitch session or a complaint session. So back to the other parent, the rejected parent.
I'm sorry, hold on for a second. I think there's someone comment that there's no sound. Could we get, can you guys let us know if you can hear us? If there's something, suddenly there's a problem with audio issue?
I'm going to double check here. Are you hearing me?
I can hear you very clearly. I just No sound.
Hmm.
You guys can't hear us. Can a few people let us know? Sharon said, "Oh, good." Okay, Casey said she can hear. So I think the audio is fine. Sue said we can hear. Yeah, no, I think the audio is fine. I apologize for interrupting. I
Okay,
just
you're
want to
very,
make
no,
sure we,
I'm
yeah,
glad you did. All right,
yeah.
so let me just say that when you're working, I'm going to summarize, but I'm going to go back to where I was. So therapists who do this successfully, not just Gottlieb, there are others out there. In in Texas, I happen to really like someone named Loretta Mays. There are other people around that are very skilled. Um, some of the Family Bridges people are very good. Kathleen Ray, who's unfortunately not still doing it, but up in Canada, Family Reflections, they have great response rates. They use this kind of technique. Nobody disagrees with the part about you need to gently disempower the child and you need to re-empower the parent. Nobody who I would trust. Now, I'm sure you can find a million people to disagree with that, but they're not people who either have any good outcomes or have any good data, because that's the crux of the matter. And if you're not comfortable, the book chapter I mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned it, where I go through axioms, um, that um, that chapter talks about timid clinicians. When timid clinicians have to do something they're not comfortable with, they tend to do nothing, right? Don't go criticizing your therapist. I have to really tell you, that's the best way to lose your case, is to get everyone mad at you. If you can't control yourself, kiss your kids goodbye. No one's going to say, oh, well, she's just bent out of shape because her kids are being abused. Almost never happens. You know, deal with it, get help, whatever. But no one I would find credible thinks that over empowering the child by, quote, listening to the voice of the child and giving the child time to vent her little spleen or his little spleen, and then beating up on the other parent and teaching that parent better parenting skills. That's why they're 0 for 1,000. What part of 0 for 1,000 did you not understand, doctor? Who think of the arrogance that you think you can beat odds of 0 for 1,000, right? It'd be like treating cancer with prune juice, which is bad enough, and then being optimistic, right? So back to the rejected parent. What you want to do is empower that parent to be the parent. So if Susan says, I need, Dr. So-and-so, Dr. Miller, can I use the bathroom? I would say, not that I do much of this kind of therapy. I've assisted a little bit, but mainly, and I've taught it, but I'm not a therapist, and I don't say I don't have an intensive program. Okay, I'm not doing that. But I do know that the right answer would be, don't ask me for permission, ask your father. Don't ask me, ask your mother, right? You want to treat the parent with respect. You want to show that dad's in charge, mom's in charge. You're not in charge. You're 17 years old, or you're not in charge, you're 7, right? Where the skill comes in is doing it in a nice way. The children love these programs. That's another thing, another straw man argument. Oh, these are draconian, extreme measures, harsh solutions, punishing the child. Some judge in Connecticut I'm going to stick my neck out here. Some judge in Connecticut had the bad judgment to attack the whole idea of such a program because it would be punishing the children for their parents' mistakes. That's like claiming it's a punishment for the child to go to Disneyland. The children like these programs. They're not extreme measures. Well, it might be extreme, but they're not harsh, draconian, or unpleasant. They're fun. It's not.
Yeah, I
It's
just wanted
an
to
argument.
Yeah, I just wanted to intervene here to add in a point that there's a study by Colorado State University on to do assessment on Linda Gottlieb program that's going to be published soon. But one of the assessment is to try to see if there's an impact on the child from being taken away from the alienator for a period of time to go through this reunification program. And I believe that the outcome of that study showed that it is not traumatic for the children to go through this.
Wonderful comment, Petra. In fact, I like to, when that study is available, and I'm quite familiar with it because I've seen the manuscript. That will be a wonderful addition to our knowledge base. But now I would also tell people to get the so-called fallacy paper from Dr. Richard Warshak, more specifically from 2015, published by the American Psychological Association, full title, 10 Parental Alienation Fallacies that Compromise Decisions in Court and in Therapy. And fallacy 10 on page 10 is summarized at the bottom right of page 11. The actual fallacy is on page 10, summarized at the bottom of page 11. And the fallacy is to believe that these programs are harmful to children. And, you know, the opposing parents and their lawyers come in. It's called catastrophizing. Oh, Your Honor, this would be a horrible thing to do to the boy. And then they bring in some usually not particularly knowledgeable expert witness. Oh, Your Honor, I can tell you what a terrible thing it would be. Even if they're right and the child is enmeshed, the boy could become psychotic and could become suicidal, could become violent, could become, that's not science. That's speculation masquerading as science. That's actually not what happens. So Rick Warshak correctly listed that as a fallacy 10 to be exact. And since it's a peer-reviewed journal article published by the APA, American Psychological Association, it can be helpful if you're litigating. Fallacy 9, by the way, is the traditional therapies work. So let me wrap up what does work. So what most therapists do, I know I'm repeating myself, but that sometimes is helpful if people are dealing with complicated science. So the average therapist fails because he or she is further empowering the child and further disempowering the rejected parent. You want to do the opposite, gently disempower the child and then gently re-empower the other parent. Another one of the common mistakes is to emphasize apologizing. And so this is a big one. I couldn't count how many parents have told me, even when there's nothing to apologize for, the therapist told me, find something to apologize for, as if like magic bullet, right? So I'll repeat, if your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. But back to my other theme, that's the obvious, here's the not so obvious. What is being missed here is the use that an alienating parent will make of that apology. And I have a few disasters where some well-intentioned lawyer, judge, mental health professional thought that, what the hell, we'll do it. We'll let the child decide on her own when to see dad, or dad needs to apologize. And you do it, but well, if dad slapped the kid, of course you apologize. If dad screamed, there's a lot of things to apologize for, once or twice. But if we're now having sessions about dad raising his voice 6 months ago, or dad took away a cell phone a year ago, and that's still the child's cause célèbre, something's very wrong here. And it's probably very wrong with the therapist's understanding of child development, right? So back to apologizing. Yes, you do it. I don't want to be misquoted. Yes, there are times when it's appropriate. Yes, there are times when you might do it more than once. But if you're overdoing it, here's the downside. First of all, the generic apology, like I'm sorry you feel that way, Joey. Kids see right through that. That's the non-apology apology. It makes them angry, and rightfully so. If the reason you just said that is some therapist told you find something to apologize for, well, that ain't a good idea, right? Another thing is it does further diminish the father to the subordinate role. A third thing is when the kid takes that back to mom, there's more than three, I'm going to give you a few, right? Kid goes back, well, you were right, dad's a liar. Why do you say that? He just apologized for something he said he never did. And now he's apologizing. And again, the principle here is think what use, if the mom is a severe alienating person who's using alienating strategies and displaying alienating behaviors, especially if severe, especially if you're trying to get the kid back with mom, with the kid, send it backwards. Let's just take a hypothetical. Mom hasn't seen the child in a year, and now the therapist is doing this. If mom hasn't seen the kid in a year, you think apology is going to fix that? The reason mom hasn't seen the kid in a year is dad has been whipping the kid into a frenzy. If you don't have enough clinical judgment to be able to see at least that's probable, if not certain, and that if you then have dad start to apologize for stuff, mom will whip it into a bigger frenzy, then you probably shouldn't be handling this kind of a case. Love you very much, but find something else to treat, doctor. So those are just a few examples of why over-reliance on apologies not only fails, but tends to make things worse. And so does listening to the voice of the child. Sure, you listen, but if the child is delusional or overempowered or sociopathic, whatever it might be, you don't want to reinforce that type of behavior. You don't want to reinforce delusions. So, I'm trying to give people, I'm done with that little bit, but, a lot of people find it incomprehensible when people say, including, I'm guessing, Dr. Klauer, say that traditional therapy is of little, if any, benefit. They just can't get their head around that. They've been doing it for years. Well, that hasn't been my experience. Well, you ain't teaching this. You ain't treating this, right? 8 years ago, I await your data with my palms up, 125,000 hits. No one sent me their article yet. No one sent me their data either. So I think this is well established. I think it's evidence-based. Linda's data will be very helpful, but we have other data. There's nothing new here.
I really have so many questions, but I don't want to kind of hold you. We are at already 2.5 hours. I have so many more questions. We barely kind of scratched the surface. So please do come back. I don't want to keep you. I know that it's very late. And parents, thank you so much for all the questions. I know we're at about 300 questions now and comments. So, or 350, actually, I just checked.
Oh my God.
So,
350. I'm happy to come back. I'm happy.
Yes, please. Thank you. So maybe like in a month or so, we'll look at, please. Thank you so much, because we barely scratched the surface. I have so many, even just for me, I have so many more questions, and parents have so many more questions. But thank you so much.
I'm going to just thank everyone. My concluding will be 2 sentences. One is thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. What makes me happy is when I'm helping people. That's why I went to medical school. If it's useful, I'm thrilled. The second is that the main message I've tried to give here today, it's really a combination of two. It's you really need someone who has a deep understanding of this. I'm trying to demonstrate that, not just say it. And don't go criticizing people who don't. They're still good. They may be excellent clinicians. They may care. They mean well. Sell yourself before you sell your policies. You might want to wait 3, 5, 10 sessions before you get to the meat of the matter. Just make friends with the therapist, make friends with the GAL, let people know you. And then in a nice, respectful way, look, I've been doing a little reading. I'm kind of wondering, and what about this book here, Children Held Hostage, over 1,000, and open up a constructive dialogue, even if you are angry, right? Even if, I understand why you're angry, probably, but don't go in there like Wyatt Earp trying to clean up Dodge City. You got to do everything at the right time, and you got to sell yourself, and you got to be likable, right? You can't just go in there criticizing. In fact, talk about marriage counseling. The most important thing marriage counselors probably could ever tell anyone is criticism kills love. That's another psych term, right? Criticism kills love. You want to have the GAL hate you? Start criticizing. Anyway, now I'm done. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. And also, there's another point I want to bring up is that you mentioned about Dr. Demos Lorandos. So Dr. Lorandos has retired, and we had the honor of doing his last interview. He told us this is the very last interview and public speaking that I ever done. So we did that interview. So if you guys haven't seen that interview, look into our videos tab. We had, I think it's like 2 or 3 hours interview with Dr. Lorandos and Dr. Jennifer Hammond. So check that out. And we can't wait for you to come back, Dr. Miller. Thank you so much. And then for parents, please share this, please like, and also continue to put questions, because I promise I'm going to go through and I'm going to try to compile a list of key questions for the next time that Dr. Miller come back. So put your question, put your comment, and really appreciate everyone. Thank you so much, and good night.
Thank you. And